Hi guys, and welcome to this video on Act 3 from Inspector Calls. And this will be the final video in the series as we're going to be looking at the final part of Act 3. And in this part, we see Gerald return with the information that the inspector was not a real inspector. This causes great excitement amongst Birling and Mrs Birling as they feel that this means there'll be no consequences and so everything can just go back to normal, nothing's going to change. However, Eric and Sheila feel that the family really need to learn from this lesson because each one of them did confess to hurting a human being, and hopefully that should lead to them gaining some sort of social responsibility and seeing that their actions have wider consequences. The Birlings refuse to accept this though, staying in their stubborn capitalist mentalities that, they need to look out for themselves and their own above everybody else in society. In this way, we see a greater rift grow between the old and the young characters in this play, and we see a greater deterioration of the family leading up to the final climax in which we find out that they actually are going to be under investigation for the suicide of a worker. Okay, but before we look at the annotation, let's listen to this part of the act.
Well, now, who's this? Had I better go?
Edna will go. I asked her to wait up to make us some tea.
It might be Gerald coming back.
Oh, yes, of course. I'd forgotten about him.
It's Mr. Croft.
I hope you don't mind my coming back.
No, of course not, Gerald.
When did that inspector go?
Only a few minutes ago. He put us all through it.
Sheila!
Well, Gerald might as well know.
No, we needn't bother him with all that stuff.
Right. But we're all in it, up to the neck. It got worse after you left.
How did he behave?
He was frightening.
If you ask me, he behaved in a very peculiar and suspicious manner.
The rude way he spoke to Mr. Birling and me, it was quite extraordinary.
Quite extraordinary.
You know something. What is it?
That man wasn't a police officer.
What?
Are you certain?
That's what I came back to tell you.
Well, you asked about him?
I met a police sergeant I know down the road. I asked him about this Inspector Gould and described the chap carefully to him. He swore there wasn't any Inspector Gould or anybody like him on the force here.
You didn't tell him?
No. I passed it off by saying I'd been having an argument with somebody, but the point is, this sergeant was dead certain they hadn't any inspector at all, like the chap who came here.
Fake!
Didn't I tell you? Didn't I say I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking to us like that?
Well, you were right. There isn't any such inspector. We've been had.
I'm going to make certain of this.
What are you going to do?
Ring up the Chief Constable, Colonel Roberts.
Careful what you say, dear.
Yeah, of course. Brumley, 8752. I was going to do this anyhow. I had my suspicions all along. Colonel Roberts, please. Mr. Arthur Birling here. Oh, Roberts. Birling here. Sorry to ring you up so late, but can you tell me if an Inspector Gould has joined your staff lately? Gould. Goole. New man, tall, clean-shaven. I see. Yes. Well, that settles it. Oh, no. That's just a little argument we were having here. Good night.
Arthur, what did he say?
There's no Inspector Gould on the police. That man definitely wasn't a police inspector at all, as Gerald said. We've been had.
I felt it all the time. He never talked like one. He never even looked like one.
This makes a difference, you know. It makes all the difference. Of course.
I suppose we're all nice people now.
If you've nothing more sensible than that to say, Sheila, you'd better keep quiet.
She's right, though.
And you'd better keep quiet. If that had been a police inspector and he'd heard you confess...
Arthur.
Yes.
You see, Gerald, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies.
That's all right. I don't want to. Well, so what do you make of this business now? Was it a hoax?
Of course. Somebody put that fellow up to coming here and hoaxing us. But there are people in this town who dislike me enough to do that. We ought to have seen through it from the very first.
I say we must discuss this business quietly and sensibly and decide if there's anything to be done about it.
You're absolutely right, my dear. Already we've discovered one important fact. That fellow was a fraud and we've been hoaxed. But we found him out. And all we have to do is to keep our heads. Now it's our turn.
Our turn to do what?
To behave sensibly, Sheila, which is more than you're doing.
What's the use of talking about behaving sensibly? You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all, and I can't see it like that. This girl's still dead, isn't she?
That's just what I feel, Eric. And it's what they don't seem to understand.
Well, whoever that chap was, the fact remains that I did what I did. We all did what we did. It's still the same rotten story whether it's been told to a police inspector or to somebody else. According to you, I ought to feel a lot better. I stole some money, Gerald. You might as well know.
Eric.
I don't care. Let him know. The money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. And I still feel the same about it, and that's why I don't feel like sitting down and having a nice, cosy talk.
Eric's absolutely right, and it's the best thing any one of us has said tonight. And it makes me feel a little bit less ashamed of us. You're just beginning to pretend all over again.
Oh, for God's sake.
Arthur.
Well, my dear, that's so damned exasperating. They just won't try to understand our position or see the difference between a lot of stuff like this coming out in private and a downright public scandal.
And I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her, and that's what matters.
I say either stop shouting or get out. Some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by now. So hold your tongue if you want to stay here.
I don't give a damn now whether I stay here or not.
You'll stay here long enough to pay back that money you stole.
But that won't bring Eva Smith back to life, will it?
And it doesn't alter the fact that we all helped to kill her.
But is it a fact?
Oh, of course it is. You don't know the whole story yet.
I suppose you're going to prove now that you didn't spend last summer keeping this girl instead of seeing me, eh?
I did keep a girl last summer. I've admitted it, and I'm sorry, Sheila.
Well, I must admit you came out of it better than the rest of us. The inspector said that.
He wasn't an inspector.
Well, he inspected us all right. And don't let's start dodging and pretending now. Between us, we drove that girl to commit suicide.
Who says so? Because I say there's no more real evidence we did than there was that chap was a police inspector.
Of course there is.
No, there isn't. Look at it. A man comes here pretending to be a police officer. It's a hoax of some kind. Now, what does he do? Very artfully, working on bits of information he's picked up here and there, he bluffs us into confessing that we've all been mixed up in this girl's life in one way or another.
And so we have.
But how do you know it's the same girl?
Oh, no, wait a minute. Let's see how that would work. Well, no, he wouldn't.
We all admitted it.
All right, you all admitted something to do with a girl. But how do you know it's the same girl? Look here, Mr. Birling. You sack a girl called Eva Smith. You've forgotten, but he shows you a photograph of her, and then you remember, right?
Yeah, that part's straightforward enough, but what then?
Well, then he happens to know that Sheila once had a girl sacked from Millwood shop. He tells us that it's this same Eva Smith, and he shows her a photograph that she recognises.
Yes, the same photograph.
How do you know it's the same photograph? Did you see the one your father looked at?
No, I didn't.
And did your father see the one he showed you?
No. And I see what you mean now.
We've no proof it was the same photograph, and therefore no proof it was the same girl. Now, take me. I never saw a photograph, remember? He caught me out by suddenly announcing that this girl had changed her name to Daisy Renton. I gave myself away at once because I'd known a Daisy Renton.
There wasn't the slightest proof that this Daisy Renton was really Eva Smith. We've only his word for it, and we'd only his word for it that he was a police inspector. And we now know that he was lying. So he could have been lying all the time.
Of course he could. Probably was. Now, what happened after I left?
I was upset because Eric had left the house, and this man said that if Eric didn't come back, he'd have to go and find him. Well, that made me feel worse still. And his manner was so severe, and he seemed so confident. Then, quite suddenly, he said I'd seen Eva Smith only 2 weeks ago.
Those were his exact words.
And like a fool, I said I had.
But, Mother, don't forget that he showed you a photograph of the girl before that, and you obviously recognised it.
Did anyone else see it?
No, he showed it only to me.
Well, then don't you see? There's still no proof it was really the same girl. He might have showed you the photograph of any girl who applied to the committee. And how do we know she was really Eva Smith or Daisy Renton?
Gerald's dead right. He could have used a different photograph each time and we'd be none the wiser. We may all have been recognising different girls.
Did he ask you to identify a photograph, Eric?
No, he didn't need a photograph by the time he got round to me, but obviously it must have been the girl I knew who went round to see Mother.
Why must it?
She said she had to have help because she wouldn't take any more stolen money. And the girl I knew had told me that already.
Even then, that may have all been nonsense.
I don't see much nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself. You lot may be letting yourselves out nicely, but I can't. Nor can Mother. We did her in all right.
Now, wait a minute. Don't be in such a hurry to put yourself in court. That interview with your mother could have just been as much a put-up job, like all this police inspector business. The whole damned thing could have just been a piece of bluff.
How could it? The girl's dead, isn't she?
What girl? There were probably 4 or 5 different girls.
That doesn't matter to me. The one I knew is dead.
Is she? How do we know she is?
That's right. How do we know any girl killed herself today?
Yeah, now answer that one. Let's look at it from this fella's point of view. We're having a little celebration here and feeling rather pleased with ourselves. Now, he has to work a trick on us. Well, the first thing he has to do is to give us such a shock that after that he can bluff us all the time. So he starts right off, huh? A girl has just died in the infirmary. She drank some strong disinfectant. Oh, she died in agony.
All right, don't pile it on.
Well, there you are, you see. Just repeating it shakes you a bit. And that's what he had to do. Shake us at once. And then start questioning us. Until we didn't know where we were. Oh, let's admit that. He had the laugh of us, all right.
He could laugh his head off if I knew it really was all a hoax.
I'm convinced it is. No police inquiry. No one girl that all this happens to. No scandal.
And no suicide?
We can settle that at once.
How?
By ringing up the infirmary. Either there's a dead girl there or there isn't.
It will look a bit queer, won't it, ringing up at this time of night?
I don't mind doing it.
And if there isn't...
Anyway, we'll see. Brumley 8986. Is that the infirmary? This is Mr. Gerald Croft of Crofts Limited. Yes. Now, we're rather worried about one of our employees. Have you had a girl brought in this afternoon who committed suicide by drinking disinfectant? Or any other suicide? Yes, I'll wait. Yes? You're certain of that? I see. Well, thank you very much. Good night. No girl has died in there today. They haven't had a suicide for months.
There you are! Proof positive! The whole story's just a load of moonshine. Gerald, let's have a drink.
Thanks. I think I could just do with one now.
So could I.
And I must say, Gerald, you've argued this very cleverly.
Well, you see, while I was out of the house, I had time to cool off and think things out a little.
Well, yes, he didn't keep you on the run, as he did the rest of us. I'll admit now he gave me a bit of a scare at the time. But I had a special reason for not wanting any public scandal just now. Eh? Well, here's to us.
Father, you're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said happened really had happened. If it didn't end tragically, then that's lucky for us, but it might have done.
But the whole thing's different now. Oh, come, can't you see that? Well, can't you? You all helped to kill her. Oh, well, I wish you could have seen the look on your faces when he said that.
You're pretending everything's just as it was before.
I'm not.
No, but these others are.
Well, isn't it? We've been had, that's all.
So nothing really happened. So there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did.
Well, why shouldn't we?
I tell you, whoever that inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something, and now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way.
You're not, eh?
No. Because I remember what he said, how he looked, and what he made me feel. Fire and blood and anguish. And it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it.
I agree with Sheila. It frightens me too.
Oh, well, then go to bed then, and don't stand there being hysterical.
They are overtired, and in the morning they'll be as amused as we are.
Everything's all right now, Sheila. Now, what about this ring?
No, not yet. It's too soon, I must think.
Look at them. The famous younger generation who know it all, and they can't even take a joke. Yes? Mr. Birling speaking. What? Here. That was the police. A girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant. And a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions.
Okay, so let's look at some annotation then. And we're going to move forward to the bit where Gerald has entered and he tells them that man wasn't a police officer. This links with the ideas of the supernatural, showing that, the police officer wasn't real, he wasn't material. Gerald indicates that he used his connections to find this out. Just look a little bit at the language that he uses. He says the police officer was dead certain they had any inspector at all like the chap who came here. Just dead. Note the language there. Possible ghost. Linking once more with that supernatural theme. Birling jumps on this, saying, by jingo, a fake, remembering to look at the adverbs excitedly. This shows that Birling feels that all will be fine now because he wasn't a police inspector, so there aren't going to be any consequences. There won't be a scandal because this person doesn't have the ability to create a scandal. Mrs. Birling reinforces the idea of how the privileged think the police should treat them by saying, I couldn't imagine a real police inspector talking like that to us. Like I say, showing her privilege and that she doesn't feel that they should be under the same kind of scrutiny as everybody. Okay, so now with this whole denial, we have to think along the lines of that Birling sees this as a way to dodge responsibility. When the inspector was real, he was going to be held responsible for his actions. Now the inspector is not real, there is no responsibility. And so, because there are no consequences, his attitude is going to stay the same. And we're going to see Birling and Mrs. Birling become fully entrenched in their kind of bubble of wealth and their bubble of privilege and refuse to accept that they need to change or think differently about the world. We'll see that all come out within their denial of the facts around Eva Smith's death. Birling saying, in fact, it makes all the difference. He believes that this is the main factor, not the fact that they've all confessed to doing horrible things to a person. Sheila completely rejects this. She says, I suppose we're all nice people now, using that sarcasm to highlight the hypocrisy with Birling and Mrs. Birling. Now that there's going to be no consequences, let's forget all that horrible stuff that we did. Sheila, in saying this, shows that she still feels responsible. Sheila and Eric, as we're going to see, are going to grow into more responsible, more socially minded people. And Eric backs that up here when he agrees, because she's right, though, showing the old versus young, showing this family split. So here's something interesting about Gerald's character. Sheila says to him, you haven't to know the rest of our crimes and idiocies, showing that they haven't been revealed yet to Gerald. And Gerald says, that's all right, I don't want to. He doesn't want to know what their crimes are. He doesn't want to know what they've done wrong, showing that Gerald is complicit in denying responsibility. He's another character that seeks to deny responsibility and refuse about the fact that he may have done something wrong. And Gerald calls it a hoax. Again, if the inspector was a hoax, it doesn't really matter because they all confess to doing something horrible. Now that's going to be a running theme around this part of the act. Mrs. Birling further emphasises the denial, saying, I'd have asked him a few questions before I allowed him to ask us any. This isn't just denying the fact that she's done anything wrong, this is denying the fact that the inspector completely dominated her in his interrogation. Again, Birling saying that fellow was a fraud and we've been hoaxed. Again, it doesn't matter because all the things that they said were true. They're not denying that they did these things, they're just pointing out the fact that the inspector wasn't real. Now we get some interesting family dynamics emerging between Birling and Eric. Birling tells Eric to sit down. He's trying to control him. Eric, sulkily, I'm all right. He won't. Now let's think a little bit about the symbolism behind that. Now, if you sit at a family table, then that's indicating that you are part of that family. Birling is asking Eric, are you part of that family? And Eric rejects that. And then Birling continues to kind of press this idea of a family split. He says that you needn't stand there as if you'd nothing to do with us, recognising that a family split may be imminent, and also showing that he wants them to stick together and deny all of these facts. Birling indicates that Eric needs to take some interest in this business, and Eric says, I take too much, that's my trouble, showing that they are beginning to feel social responsibility. And this is very much the opposite to the Birlings. Birling continues to try and use control and power dynamics of parent and child. He says, leave this to us, keep quiet, all that kind of stuff. Mrs Birling says they need to behave sensibly, and I think this sensibly refers to them denying and rejecting any responsibility for the murder of Eva Smith. So now Eric and Sheila are going to press Mr and Mrs Birling about their own ideas around social responsibility. So Eric says, you're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all, showing that he feels that Birling is rejecting what they've all learnt about each other. Birling is trying to take things back to the beginning of the play. He's trying to make things as they were at the beginning of the night. And Eric has learned, Eric has grown, he can't really get his head around that. And neither does Sheila. She says, and it's what they don't seem to understand, that things are different, and that she now has a different attitude to social responsibility. Here's a good quotation to remember. Eric says that to him and Sheila, it's the same rotten story, rotten, showing that it's bad. He also confesses to Gerald that he stole the money, showing additional confession, showing a growth in terms of honesty. And here's, again, a really key thing. Eric says the money's not the important thing. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. To him, capitalism has now fallen away for caring for somebody else within society. And this is the direct opposite of Birling. You think about that statement, the money's not the important thing. To Birling, the guy who wanted higher prices and lower costs, money is the only thing. Sheila recognises this change in Eric and says that it makes me feel a bit less ashamed of us. This is the idea that Eric has changed, and so she feels happy for him. Again, it also emphasises the ideas around the old versus the young. And we then see Birling further criticising the younger generation, saying they just won't try to understand our position, showing that he is, self-obsessed, and that kind of individualistic attitude where what's happening to me personally is the only important thing. To him, a girl has died, and he just doesn't care. It's what does it do to him? He says they don't understand the difference between it coming out in public and a downright public scandal, showing that he wants to protect his social standing. Again, that individualistic attitude that he needs to protect himself above everything. Eric shouts, and I say the girl's dead and we all helped to kill her. This shows the massive split between the young and the old in this play. Now Birling starts to leverage his patriarchal power against him, making the comment, some fathers I know would have kicked you out of the house anyhow by this time, showing that he believes that he's being quite fair in his treatment of the youth, in kind of just shutting him down and not accepting his ideas. We see further evidence of his capitalist attitude. You'll stay here long enough to give me an account of that money you stole. Again, to him, the most important thing is the money. To Eric, as he previously said, that is the least important thing. And that's a real good thing to talk about if you were to get the split between the old and the young come up as an exam question. We then see kind of a development of the previous idea that he was this family's inspector. Sheila says that he inspected us all right. And this is the idea that he looked into them and pulled out their guilt. His presence made them confess. But at the same time, he looked at every detail of the crimes that they had committed. Now we start to see Gerald's confidence within his denial. He says there's no more real evidence we did than there was that chap was a police inspector. Gerald now starts to sow the seeds of doubt to try and help Birling and Mrs Birling deny responsibility. As we see here, the Birlings are now going to try to reduce their responsibility over Eva's death through hypocrisy and just, kind of general manipulation of the situation. Gerald says, how do you know it's the same girl? His whole line of argument is going to be, what if we did this thing to lots of different girls? It doesn't really make a difference because they still did all of these things to the other girls. And at the realisation of this, Gerald is described as looking triumphantly at them, again remembering that adverbs that Priestley uses are really good indicators of the characters and their attitudes. So this shows that his joy the idea of getting out of it. He's really happy that they are now going to be able to wriggle out of it because of, his kind of twist in logic. Gerald then outlines his plan, but as I say here, even if there are different girls, the point of the inspector's final speech was there are millions of girls like Eva who need help. So if they don't understand that even if they affected one girl each one of those girls represents a whole group of people who are being exploited by capitalists and people with no social responsibility. So if they don't understand that, then inevitably they learn nothing, they don't grow, and society does not get better. Birling, further emphasises this by saying the inspector could have been lying all the time. Again, that doesn't make any difference because the Birlings told the truth. They said everything that they did, and they're not denying that. So now we see Mr. and Mrs. Birling really twisting logic on its head, talking about the inspector asking Mrs. Birling if she'd met Daisy Renton. She says, "And like a fool, I said yes, I had." Which begs the question, do fools tell the truth? Because she had. This had happened. She then goes on to say, "I answered more or less as he wanted me to answer," pretending to be manipulated by the inspector, pretending that the things that she said had happened hadn't really happened. Gerald further emphasising the idea that, what if this was lots of different girls? He says, how do we know she was really Eva Smith or Daisy Renton? But again, it really doesn't matter, because the things that they've confessed to doing, they actually did. And now Eric manages to put quite a big hole in Gerald's logic. He asks him, she said she had to have help because she didn't want to take any more stolen money. And the girl I knew had told me that already. That his and Mrs. Birling's stories kind of corroborate. And in fact, if you look at all of their stories, there are lots of details within each of them that do match up. The appearance of Eva Smith, her circumstances, all those kinds of things. Now, Gerald replies to that, even then, that may have all been nonsense. Gerald is prepared to overlook inconvenient truths to make this narrative fit what he wants. This is not really based in logic. Eric replies, "I don't see much nonsense about it when a girl goes and kills herself." He says, "You lot may be letting yourselves out nicely, but I can't." Eric cannot pass on responsibility. He feels responsible for this girl's death. Again, Gerald really trying to push this idea, says there were probably 4 or 5 different girls. Again, it really doesn't matter. Gerald then raises the question, how do we even know that a girl killed herself? And Birling, look at, this triumphantly, this use of that adverb. I think it shows rich people convincing themselves that their actions have no consequences, so they feel no guilt about their exploitation of others. This really is what this exercise is about. Birling taking it one step further and saying now he has to work a trick on us, indicating that the inspector has gone out of his way to trick them. You've got to ask yourself why? For what gain? Why would someone do this? And then, sinking to a new low, Birling belittles Eva Smith's death. He tries to show the inspector was laying on thick to shake them and rattle them. This kind of mocking of the inspector. And then we see what Birling's ultimate aim is. I'm convinced it is no police inquiry, no one girl that all this happens to, no scandal. And Sheila asks, and no suicide? But again, let's unpack that. So if a girl hasn't killed herself, does it matter? Because again, each one of them has confessed to doing a horrible thing to a human being. So does it change what they did? Does it change the fact that each one of these people has exploited another human being in some way? And then they decide to find out by ringing up the infirmary. Now, as I've said before, the issue is their behaviour. If there is no suicide this time, and they don't change, there could be a suicide in the future. And we'll see that in what Sheila says next. So inevitably we find out that there is no suicide, that no girl has died today, and that nobody's been brought in after drinking disinfectant. And Birling feels totally vindicated by this. He feels that, they're off the hook, everything is going to be fine. We see this where he produces a huge sigh of relief. He says nobody likes to be sold as badly as that, but for all that, he smiles at them all, saying, "Gerald, have a drink." Like I say, he feels vindicated. He feels that life can go on as normal. And with this, we have to think everyone except Sheila and Eric are willing to overlook everything they know about each other if there is no public scandal. And this, once more, shows the hypocrisy within the rich, particularly a character like Mrs. Birling, who preaches staunch conservative social values, When it comes to their own actions, they're perfectly willing to overlook them as long as there are no consequences. Mrs. Birling, with a little bit of structural symmetry, she says, "You've argued this very cleverly, and I'm most grateful." It's showing that he'd argued that they've done nothing wrong and managed to convince them that everything is now fine. The structural symmetry is, if you remember with the production of The Ring in Act 1, Mrs. Birling says, I think that was very clever the way Gerald did that. So, it's just a way of tying up the play a little bit now. Birling tries to belittle Sheila's change in attitude. He says, "Come on, Sheila, don't like that. All over now." Showing he wants them to go back to normal. Now, this is where Sheila shows that even if there is no suicide, it doesn't really matter. Because the worst part is, we're forgetting one thing I still can't forget. Everything we said had happened really had happened. And this shows that to Sheila, this does make a difference. This shows that Sheila does want to face these facts. Birling replies, "The whole thing's different now, even though it's not. They revealed they did these horrible things. It is not different." Birling now tries to mock the youth. He says, I wish you could have seen the look on your faces when he said that." And again, there's irony within that. Birling was absolutely petrified. The things that he said when he was being interrogated show that he was massively impacted by the inspector too. Now we see more in terms of this family split. Sheila says, "It frightens me the way you talk." And she's scared at the fact that Mr. and Mrs. Birling are refusing to accept any responsibility for this. And then, in kind of another low to Birling, he says to Sheila, "You better ask Gerald for that ring you gave back to him, hadn't you?" Showing that him and Mrs. Birling are willing to overlook Gerald's cheating because, again, there aren't going to be any consequences. Sheila, building on this idea of pretense, says, "You're pretending everything's just as it was before," and Eric says, "I'm not." Sheila and Eric have both changed. They are growing. This is more of that family split. Sheila once more showing she wants to be a better person. She says to them, "So there's nothing to be sorry for, nothing to learn. We can all go on behaving just as we did." And Mrs. Birling asks, "Well, why shouldn't we?" This shows that inherent privilege, that inherent bubble of wealth in which they just do not see their impact on the wider world. Sheila says, "You began to learn something and now you've stopped. You're ready to go on the same old way." So when the consequences of our actions go away, she's saying that that's when they stop learning. When you're not presented with the consequences anymore, you just forget about the impact that you have on other people. Sheila now repeats the words of the inspector, "The fire and blood and anguish, and it frightens me the way you talk, and I can't listen to any more of it." And this is the idea that the youth have more staked on the future, but the old control it. And this was very much the situation in 1914, with the beginnings of World War One. A lot of young people faced death with that war, but young people weren't making the decisions whether to fight or not. That was all old institutions across Europe, and the decisions to kill lots of young men during that war were taken by, old colonels, old generals within the armies. Eric agrees with the sentiment again, saying, "It frightens me too." We get a final piece of parental control from Mrs. Birling. She says they're overtired. In the morning they'll be as amused as we are. That's very, very patronising. Gerald saying, "Everything's all right now, Sheila," holding up the ring. "What about this ring?" So, here we have another piece of structural symmetry around that ring. At the beginning of the play, he presented it to her and she accepted it with glee. At the end of the play, he presents it to her and she replies, "No, not yet. It's too soon. I must think." The whole context behind their relationship has changed now. And Gerald just wants things to go back to normal, whereas Sheila is prepared to change and grow within her life. Birling, with a final push for this old versus young split, says, "Look at the pair of them, the famous younger generation who know it all and they can't even take a joke." Now this is, I've said it before at the beginning of the videos, Birling is always wrong, and this is him finally being wrong. He's wrong at the end, he's wrong at the beginning, because they see it for what it is, not a joke at all, but a lesson to learn from and grow as human beings. Then we get a final telephone ring, and this is the beginning of the twist. Birling answers the phone. "Yes, Mr. Birling speaking. What, here?" And the person rings off and puts the phone down, and it indicates to the family that that was the police. It indicates to the family that was the police. A girl has just died on her way to the infirmary after swallowing some disinfectant, and a police inspector is on his way here to ask some questions. So this final twist further emphasises the supernatural elements of the inspector, because this shows that the inspector knew the future. He knew what was going to happen, and he came to their house to punish each character for what they had done. And I think this also shows that Parisi is telling the audience that consequences, in the end, they always catch up to you, and you do always have to account for the things that you do to other people in this world. Okay, so that's the last video. Thank you guys for sticking with it. I hope you found some things useful across the time. I'm certainly glad to have them all done now. Brilliant. Like I say, I hope you found that useful, and I'll speak to you all soon. Bye bye.